Hello, and welcome to the JCC of Metro Detroit online. My name is Debbie Levin, and I am the co-chair for SAJE, Seminars for Adult Jewish Enrichment. It's my pleasure to welcome you on this Sunday afternoon to Climate, a visual dialogue through a Jewish lens. I also want to extend our deepest gratitude to the SAJE committee members and to Natalie Belazovich, Janice Charach Gallery Director. Your dedication, innovation, and commitment to making programming like this possible. So thank you, as well as to our committee. We have really a very enlightening presentation for you today, and we want you to be part of it. You can ask questions and offer comments in the YouTube comment section, which should be on your screen below, or by texting the number in the corner of your screen. Our speaker has a great presentation prepared, and we'll take as many of your questions as we can. While you're here at our YouTube channel, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the reminder bell. That way you'll never miss any of our exciting events. The focus of today's event is Climate, a visual dialogue through the Jewish lens. Joining us is Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Diamond from the Jewish Theological Seminary, as well as art curators Laura Earle, Leslie Sobel, and Olivia Gutterson from the Environmentally Speaking exhibit currently at the Janice Charach Gallery. Engaging in critical conversation about our changing climate and related perils we face. Environmentally Speaking is a multidisciplinary and accessible exhibit examining our interspecies connectedness, offering viable ways we can positively impact our collective future now. Dr. Eliezer Diamond is the Rabbi Judah Nadich Associate Professor of Talmud and Rabbinics at the Jewish Theological Seminary. He teaches courses in rabbinic literature and introductory, intermediate, and advanced Talmud studies. Dr. Diamond has written on prayer, asceticism, and issues of environmental law and ethics. Dr. Diamond was ordained as the Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary of Yeshiva University and received his doctorate in Talmud from JTS. Leslie Sobel is the artist daughter of two scientists. Her experience as an activist, a mother of three children, a caregiver for a 90-plus father, and former tech entrepreneur reflect the way many women are pulled in multiple directions, both strengthening and challenging her focus as an artist. She has done master's work in technology management and has an MFA based on regenerative culture. Her work focuses on water and climate issues, often working in partnership with scientists in the field and in labs. Olivia Gutterson is a self-taught, multidisciplinary artist living and working in Detroit, Michigan. In 2020, she curated her first exhibition, The Space Between, at the Ann Arbor Art Center. She is presently a resident at Sobel's Shrine, AS 220's Practice, and MacArthur Binion's Modern Ancient Brown. Her work has been shown at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Detroit, Arab American National Museum, and more. Laura Earle is a Detroit-based independent curator and artist whose work is a catalyst for community building and creating change. As an artist, she works in a variety of media, including 3D works in wood, metal, glass, paper, clay, large-scale installations, as well as two-dimensionally in oil paint, watercolor, and printmaking. Earle carries a Master of Fine Arts degree from Eastern Michigan University and a bachelor's degree from Purdue University in visual communication and industrial design. Please join me in welcoming today Rabbi Eliezer Diamond, Laura Earle, Leslie Sobel, and Olivia Gutterson.
Hello, everyone. I'm Eliezer Diamond. I'm going to begin with a personal note. You might notice that I'm a bit unkempt. My father passed away a little over 2 weeks ago, and I'd like to, I'm still in the Shloshim period, and so I'm not shaving. And I'd like to dedicate the Torah study today to his memory, Rabbi Dr. Edward Diamond. Zichrono Livracha, may his memory be for a blessing. I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to share some words of Torah with you. In my own synagogue, which is Congregation Beth Shalom in Teaneck, New Jersey, for many, many years, we've had an artist's Beit Midrash, which is co-led by a text teacher and an artist. And I had the privilege to be a co-leader of that for quite a number of years. And one of the things that I learned from that experience is that art is a form of midrash. I grew up in a word-heavy environment, and I'm not that visually acute. And being in that milieu, being part of the artist's Beit Midrash, gave me a great appreciation for the way in which art can illuminate words and thoughts. And that's, I'm sure, what we're going to be seeing today. I'm starting the program with the words. I'm the words person, but I hope also to both be inspired by the art, which I have already seen and is beautiful, and very anxious to hear more about it, and perhaps to add some thoughts that might enrich our understanding of the significance of that art. So when we talk about, my theme here is Torah, let's call it Torah, Judaism if you want, but I prefer Torah and environmentalism. And I'm going to give us a short introduction by way of 4 verses in the Torah, or 4 passages in the Torah. There are others, and I think some of our other artists will mention them and reflect on them. But the ones I want to reflect on are first, Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. And I'll read these verses, though I'm sure all of you know these verses. Vayichlu hashamayim va'aretz v'chol tzva'am. The heaven and earth were finished, and all their array. On the 7th day, God finished the work that God had been doing, and God ceased on the 7th day from all the work that God had done. And God blessed the 7th day and declared it holy, because on it God ceased from all work of creation that God had done. Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik once said, the reason that the story of the creation is included in the Torah and appears at the very beginning, or one way of understanding this, is that we are supposed to imitate God. And one of the ways in which we are supposed to imitate God is to be creators, just as God is the creator with a capital C. But if we follow that logic, we also have to follow in God's path in knowing when to stop, in knowing when to cease. There should be limits to the use of power. There should be limits to the act of creation. And part of living in a harmonious fashion with the world is truly understanding that just because we can fashion something doesn't necessarily mean that we should fashion it. We have to know when to step back and when to say, no, this is too much, or the negatives of producing this and doing this will outweigh the positives. That's the first verse I want to mention to you. The second comes from Deuteronomy, chapter 20, and it's verses 19 and 20. And it reads as follows. When in your war against the city, you have to besiege it a long time in order to capture it. You must not destroy its trees, wielding the axe against them. When you are besieging a city, there are several reasons why you might choose to cut down the trees outside the city. One is that they provide sustenance for the besieged city. People might sneak out of the city and take fruit off the tree and sustain themselves, so you want to remove that possibility. Two is that it can be used to hide. Soldiers can use it, the enemy can use it to hide and attack you. So these are at least two reasons why in attacking and besieging a city, you might decide that it's a good idea to cut down the trees. So Deuteronomy 20:19 says, you may not do that. You must not destroy its trees, wielding the axe against them. You may eat of them, but you must not cut them down. Why? And here I'm reading the translation that is one of many. The original is ambiguous, but this translation says, are trees of the field human to withdraw before you into the besieged city? Trees are innocent bystanders, so to speak. So the natural world should not be caught in the crossfire of our activities, particularly when they are destructive or rapacious ones. That, I think, is what the Torah means to teach us here. Now, I do want to introduce something, and this is important to say. Very often when we look to a tradition, we want the tradition to say all of the right things. And rabbinic tradition sometimes has a deep appreciation of environmental issues, and sometimes not so much. So the next verse, verse 20 says, only trees that you know do not yield food may be destroyed. You may cut them down for constructing siege works against the city that is waging war on you until it has been reduced. The idea being, in the case of these trees, there's no issue of sustainability, because this is a big part of the conflict or the tension here. There's a short-term gain for me in cutting down these fruit trees, but long-term, I am endangering sustainability. So the Torah says, cut down trees that are not fruit-bearing trees. The rabbis go on to say, to understand these verses to mean that any time the tree that you cut down, even if it's a fruit-bearing tree, is worth more economically than it is worth as a tree, if the wood is worth more than the tree is as a tree, you may cut down the wood. So in other words, the rabbis, in my opinion, fall into the trap of commodifying nature here. Instead of hewing to the simple meaning of the text, which is fruit-bearing trees are sacrosanct. Don't cut them down. They bring in economic considerations. And so when we look at our tradition, we need to look at it as loving critics, to say, we care about our tradition, we love our tradition. We also know that it's created by human beings who have their own limitations, cultural contexts. And so sometimes we can say to our tradition, in this case, we think we need to look in a different direction from where the rabbinic tradition is taking us. The third verse is chapter 19 in Deuteronomy, verse 14. You shall not move your countrymen's landmarks set up by previous generations in the property that will be allotted to you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. This simply means that, we use the word landmark, and I think we forget that landmark originally means a landmark, a boundary stone, something that tells me this is where A's property ends and B's property begins. And the Torah here is telling us that I may not move a boundary stone so as to take some of someone else's land into my property, assimilated into my property. And here we have another very, very important principle, and that is restraint, proportion, and respect of others. What the Torah is teaching me here is we are all neighbors, and I have to respect what is my neighbor's. I cannot do whatever is beneficial for me and ignore what is good and right for my neighbor. And from this verse, there's a whole chapter of Mishnah, the second chapter of Bava Batra, chapter 2, where the rabbis talk about the laws of neighbors. I may not use my land even though all the activity is taking place on my land, I may not use it in a way that has a negative effect on your land, because that's a violation of this verse. Even though I'm not literally moving the landmark, I am expanding my use because I am depending on your land being degraded in some way in order for me to be able to accomplish my goal. So if I have a factory that is spewing toxins into the air, okay, the factory is on a particular piece of land, but I am stepping over the landmark. I am appropriating for myself air that does not belong to me. It belongs to everyone. And so this is another part of our tradition, which is that in being environmentally aware has to do with ben adam lechavero, showing respect and responsibility towards other human beings. The last thing that I want to mention is in Exodus chapter 20. And this is in the Ten Commandments. And the verse is verse 14. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female slave, or his ox, or his ass, or anything that is your neighbor's. This last commandment of the Ten Commandments has never been well understood, but to me, it's one of the most important of, maybe the most important of the commandments. Because what this commandment tells us is that really the source of most evil in the world is people wanting that which is not theirs to have. And that's obvious in the case of my seeing something that you have and my wanting it, coveting it, wanting it, and coveting means wanting it to the degree that I obsess about it and ultimately I obtain it from you through whatever means necessary. But I want us to see that in terms of the contemporary environmental scene, we need to see our role as consumers in the environmental crisis. That is, there are factories that spew toxins into the air. There are all kinds of ways in which the environment is being degraded. But one of the reasons that happens is that we, as consumers, create demand. We create demand for things to be made, to be fashioned, to be manufactured. And so I think we have to look at ourselves and say, to what degree am I coveting? To what degree am I asking for a kind of life that involves activities that are going to degrade the environment? Am I doing my part to limit what I partake of the world around me and what I ask of the world around me? Can I separate myself from a consumerist mentality and way of life Because if I don't, then I'm part of the problem. And I'm speaking first and foremost to myself, but I'm fairly sure I'm not alone in this. And I think this is the important lesson of lo tachmod, to live in a way that has measure, that has limits, that is able to appreciate what one has without a constant hankering for more. Developing that kind of balance in my life is a very important part of living an environmentally responsible life. So that's what I wanted to share with you. And now I, as I'm sure you, look forward to hearing from our artists.
Hi, everybody. My name is Laura Earle, and I'm one of the artists for the show, Environmentally Speaking. Thank you so much, Rabbi Diamond, for sharing your thoughts and insights regarding Torah. I certainly found them illuminating, and I would like to say that, some of the thoughts that occur to me whenever I'm making work, especially work about the environment, I am thinking a lot about utilizing materials responsibly, conveying concepts that I feel are relevant to, the environment. And so with this first piece that I think briefly popped up on the screen, this piece is called Pollinators, and it's a 2-story installation. If you could, yeah, that's lovely. Thank you. It's a 2-story installation made primarily of paper. And you'll notice that as it ascends to the top, there is a gilded piece there. If you could hang on there for just a second, maybe go back one, Natalie, I would appreciate it. So along the base of the perimeter of the piece at the floor are a number of pollinators cut from paper, mostly butterflies and bees. And as they're on the ground, they have no coloring to them. They're just completely blank. And as they ascend toward that gilded piece at the very center, they gain detail, they gain hand-painted details and gilding as they go up towards the top. And if you'd show the top, please, that would be great. So you can see how much more colorful they are at the very top. And my thinking on this is that we're currently in a situation where our pollinator populations are declining rapidly at an alarming rate. And our pollinators include, I'm featuring bees and butterflies here, but in reality, they include many more species as well. And it's because of the fact that we are overly dependent on herbicides and pesticides, and we're killing them off. And there are some statistics that say that 1 in 3 bites of food that we take, we get our food because of the fact that these pollinators participate in pollinating the plants that we depend upon for our own sustenance. And of course, many other ecologies also depend upon for their vibrance. And so I wanted to call attention to the fact that these pollinators are definitely in dire straits. And we stand in a position. So if you visit the gallery, you'll actually be able to stand at the center of this piece and consider what role you want to take in the situation that we're currently in. If you think about your own use of pesticides, your own use of herbicides, and in the environment where you are living, like and working, take a look around and find ways to decrease your dependence on those things. Take a look around and find ways to plant trees, flowering trees or flowering plants that can support these important populations of pollinators. Do what you can in your own personal agency to participate in Tikkun Olam and help heal this particular situation in the world. And so this piece, again, using materials that are sustainably gathered. The bee, that little bee that you see at the bottom, is a fuzzy little sculpture. The dies were made from onion skins that were at the bottom of the barrel. There's so much that we can do that we don't have to rely on overly commercialized products when we create things. And here's another view, seeing the piece in its entirety from the balcony. And so I would just encourage people, when I thought about what Torah portions or what concepts were important to me when thinking about this, I thought about 2 words in particular that come from Bereshit when it describes our relationship to creation. And One is kabosh, which is, dominion, or to have dominion. But another one is shomer, or to be guardians and stewards. And so I feel that we are to understand that our role can be somewhere in the middle, that we need to balance these two things. And so I very much echo what Rabbi shared with us earlier about, yes, being creators, but yes, knowing when to set limits.
Laura,
Mhm.
if I may, there's another passage that your work here evokes, or so it seems to me, and that's Deuteronomy 22:6. If along the road you chance upon a bird's nest in any tree or on the ground with fledglings or eggs, and the mother sitting over the fledglings or on the eggs, do not take the mother together with her young. Let the mother go and take only the young, in order that you may fare well and have a long life. And the commentators point out, Rabbi Don Isaac of Bravanel, 15th century commentator, says that this is talking about it's the well-being of the species, but also of humanity. We're connected. And when we endanger the sustainability and the well-being of species, we're also endangering ourselves. And I think that's what your work is demonstrating to us very, very powerfully.
Thank you, definitely. And I guess with that, we'll hand it over to Olivia Guterson.
Hi. Thank you so much, Laura and Rabbi Diamond, for just grounding this conversation and also just uplifting the work and things that we can do in our own life. I guess I'll just briefly kind of talk about what this portion of the show, this exhibition is. So this is the view of luminality. It's a response that kind of Laura and I created together. So there's definitely works that represent both of us. It's really about what is available to us when we remember, when we pause, when we acknowledge that we are of Earth as we are Earth. And in that remembering, how can we move into a way of living in right relationship with the Earth? And so really all of this work, you can keep scrolling through, Natalie. It's a visual meditation. It's an offering of peace, to pause, to remember. I also, you'll see a lot of these medallion pieces that I patterned that reference a lot of nature and natural rhythms. They're meant to be portals of possibility, and again, like what is available and remembering. Work is really good in meditation, in honoring the earth. And again, I also try to choose and select materials that are sustainably sourced. I actually wanted to kind of talk about what grounded this body of work in general. And I'm going to read a bit from Ecclesiastes 7:13. So this is kind of what really inspired the genesis of all these works. There's 14 portals in the light sculpture that Laura and I created there. So this portion, look at God's work, for who can straighten what he has twisted? When the Blessed Holy One created the first human, he took him and led him around all the trees of the Garden of Eden and said to him, look at my works, how beautiful and praiseworthy they are. And all that I have created, it was for you that I created it. Pay attention that you do not corrupt and destroy my world. If you corrupt it, there is no one to repair it after you. And not only that, you cause the death to Zeke. So there's a couple things that kind of to me when I'm thinking about this, and kind of how, what does it look like to create work that shows in a responsibility to be in a relationship with the earth. And I was thinking a lot about, like, what is the true forget that we also are animals, and how do we build in a way? I've been thinking a lot about how do we forget where we came from, what our roots are, where we're from, what is available when we do pay attention, what do we miss when we don't pay attention? And kind of something that I actually wanted to engage in conversation with you, Rabbi Diamond. Maybe you can kind of ground this. That last bit of that text that I read, it really elevates this concept of like what happens if we don't step into our role as stewards of this world. Not only do we understand the idea of robbing from our descendants, but we also forget that we're also robbing from our ancestors. And so I would love to kind of hear if you had any thoughts about that, because I right now, strive to be a good ancestor. Like I want my son and my futures to have a thriving, beautiful world, as I want that for all other humans and animals and fungi and, bees and pollinators. But I also want to think back to all that our ancestors have gone through to get us to this point, and like, how can we remember that it's our job now to be good descendants?
That's great. I'm just going to respond associatively. I'm teaching a course right now on the Seder and the Haggadah. And of course, one of the most important features of the Passover story and telling the Passover story, the Torah expresses a lot of anxiety about, will our children, will the next generation remember the story? Will they value the story? Will they tell the story to the next generation? And what you made me think about, and I never really thought about it in exactly these terms, is that if I don't tell the story that my parents told me, I'm not only denying my children or the next generation the opportunity to hear the story, I really, in a sense, have betrayed the trust of my ancestors. My ancestors, as you said, worked so hard to remember the story, to tell the story every year, to tell it to me so that I would tell it to the next generation. So not telling it, I'm not only betraying the next generation, but also my ancestors. And I can see how that is true of how we behave environmentally as well. So that if we're not environmentally responsible, and I think this is the point that you're making, you can correct me, we're not only making a terrible world for the next generation, but we've betrayed our ancestors and everything that they did to create the world that we live in. And with the hope that we would make it as an even better world. So yes, failure to be environmentally responsible is a big betrayal in both directions. It's a heavy responsibility. Thank you for pointing that out. I really had not thought about it in those terms.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that too. And I think the further back we go, like, there's that through line that we're all connected to every life force, to every energy, and so it's definitely within our own lineage what that responsibility is, but also collectively, which I think is the moment we're at right now, where it's like we need to pause and we need to really survey where we're at and really make massive changes, and see that ripple forward, so that we can be, live in right relationship and have a future where everyone's thriving and connected. And I think that's really what this is about. Like, there is a spiritual aspect to being present and, really contributing to the solutions that are available to us now. But I think I wanted to introduce Leslie and kind of her work, which I really think speaks to this. And she has such depth in the way she researches and grounds the work that she creates.
Thank you. Nice handoff in the way that all of our work connects, I think. And thank you, Rabbi, for starting us off and grounding this in the kind of core ideas behind it all. So for me, really, my work is very rooted in Tikkun Olam and the idea that healing the world is good stewardship, is addressing how damaged our whole ecosystem has become between climate change, the overuse of our resources, habitat loss, and really the obligation of those of us who are better off to help those who are less so. And, pragmatics aside, it's a moral obligation to care for the planet as we care for each other so that we all still have a place to live, food to eat, clean water to drink, fresh air to breathe for everybody, not just us. And these are issues to me that interconnect both with my understanding of Judaic practice, but also with the book that a good chunk of this show is based in, All We Can Save, which is talking about the idea of climate resilience, of caregiving, caring for one another and for the planet and for all the organisms that inhabit it. So the images you're looking at are my piece Interwoven Ecologies. And this is a piece that's densely woven with different kinds of ways of representing organisms, ranging from the toad you see on the middle of the screen in the last slide, to algae, to whales, to trees, to mammals. It's all connected. And I stitched this together, I wove it together because, to my mind, that kind of interweaving really represents where we fit in the world, how it's all connected in different and complex and beautiful ways. And that kind of relationship is something that we need to keep healing, to keep improving, as we've damaged it through lack of understanding, through greed, and through putting dominion over stewardship, I would say. So to close the circle, coming back to Laura's comments about dominion versus stewardship, I believe that we need to pivot hard more towards stewardship right now, to be in right relationship with nature. As Olivia says, to be both good ancestors and good descendants. The more we think of ourselves as an integral part of the world, the better equipped we are to work towards healing all the damage we've inflicted, all the ways that things depend on us and we depend on them to live a good life. And I think we can do that. And that was the key takeaway from the book, All We Can Save, which was a big part of this exhibition in terms of the ideas that we all drew from. And to me, it's a hopeful idea. It's the idea of Tikkun Olam. We can fix it. And we should not despair. We should go forward in hope to do the work that needs to be done. And that's, for me, that is the key issue in all of this. Is we have a lot of work to do, and we need to roll up our sleeves and start working on it more.
So, Leslie, your work and your comments make me think of a medieval work known as Perek Shirah, a chapter of song, that emanates from mystical circles. I don't remember the dating now, maybe 6th or 7th century, but don't hold me to it. In there somewhere. And what that work does, it takes off on a theme that we find in a lot of the Psalms. So, for example, a psalm that's said every Sabbath is Psalm 19. And I'm just going to flip to it so I could just read us the beginning. So it begins, Hashamayim saprim kvod el u'maaseh yadav magid harakia. The heavens declare the glory of God. The sky proclaims God's handiwork. The idea being that we can see God's greatness and glory in the natural world, and it's as if the natural world is telling us, look how wondrous the Creator is. Look what the Creator has created. What's interesting about Perek Shirah is that it takes this biblical theme and runs with it. And the way it does that is by assigning some biblical verse to a panoply of fauna and flora, and imagines that each of them has some verse that they recite in God's, to praise God. Fleas, spiders, scorpions. In other words, it's not just, in the Bible, yes, the heavens and the sun and the moon, yeah, we get that's all very majestic. But what the author of Perek Shirah is saying, all of it, even the creatures that you may think of as, icky or problematic, they're part of the picture. They're part of the world. They're interconnected, which is what you're portraying in your art. And they're all part of the song. And it's like an orchestra. If you remove one instrument, the piece is just, the symphony is not going to sound the same. So you don't look at the particular instrument and say, oh, I don't know, I don't think that one's that important. No, it is. So I think that's what Perek Shirah is emphasizing. And that's what I take away, one of the things that I take away from your artwork.
Very much so. I like that idea that they all have their own song and that we're diminished without all of them.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
So we have some questions that came through on the comment section. So Rabbi Diamond, can you address Naomi Levine expressed her condolences for the loss of your father and wanted to ask you about how Jewish burial traditions are ecologically oriented?
That's an excellent question. Jewish burial traditions. Okay, let me start off by saying, here we have to go back to something that I said earlier. We always want our tradition to come down on what we consider to be the right side of the issue, and so there are people who will say, burial is not the environmental ideal. Cremation is the environmental ideal. Why should we be taking up more and more land for the purposes of burial? So I'm going to acknowledge that is an argument that can be made and that has been made. That's not the traditional Jewish burial practice. And what I will do is just describe a little bit what I think Jewish tradition understands burial to be about, and to suggest that at least symbolically, even if on the practical level, perhaps more problematically, it indicates a great sense of connection to the world, because the idea of burial, being buried in the ground, is that you slowly assimilate once again into the earth. You came from dust, God says to Adam, and to dust you shall return. And so it's this very gentle, natural, gradual process of returning to the earth. And it is a reminder that in the end, that's all we are. If you're my age, and maybe even if you're younger, you remember the song Dust in the Wind. And in a way, that's what the verse says. And in a way, that's what burial says. So it's both a giving us a measure of humility, but also speaking of a certain harmony. We should not be at odds with the earth, because we are of the earth and we will return to the earth.
Beautiful. Leslie, did you have any other comments about your artwork or questions for the rabbi to address with regards to your work?
No, actually, the comments that you just made about all we are is dust in the wind, but that interconnection between us and the world and life and death is so profound, and it's so much of an issue for all of us to not set ourselves as separate from the natural world, but rather as part of it, as connected to it.
Yeah. I think I agree, and maybe I'm sort of lobbying here, but I would say, going back to the cremation burial question, I think one of the important characteristics of burial is it is a kind of stepping back and letting nature do its own work.
Yes.
And that, I think, is a very powerful part of burial. Anyway, yeah. Olivia, did you want to say something?
Oh, I think all the curators and artists are just jumping back on. But no, I'm really just ruminating on what you're just saying right now. And I really like the idea of, being dust and wind and just this process. And I think there's something beautiful too about understanding that there is continuation after death, like it's part of this process, and I think actually some of how we've got to where we are is like avoiding death, like I think if we can learn how to embrace it, then we can really understand the beauty of this short lives that we have, and not be so obsessed with maybe the things that we need, when there's so much more to this, but yeah. I guess one thing I just want to say about the show in general is I think art as an offering and entryways to having these hard conversations is like really, really important.
Yeah, definitely. Art speaks in ways that words and other forms of communication do not.
Yeah.
I think it can tap right straight to the soul, and for that, it's extremely powerful. And I love how you compared it with Midrash. I think that's so spot on. And I was listening to what everybody was saying here today. I just kept coming back to the idea of echad, about oneness. When I was working on the pollinator piece, and I was thinking about swarms and how, individual insects become part of this other new one entity moving as a different kind of being in essence. I kept coming back to that idea as we all were discussing different aspects of how we are part of nature, that the way we behave as human beings has a huge impact, not only on each other, but on the natural world as well. And that notion of echad just kept coming up to me again and again. And I wonder, Rabbi, if you have any, thoughts on that as well.
On echad?
Yeah, and how it relates to the environment, what we've been talking about today.
Well, again, I tend to be very associative in my thinking, for better or for worse. And what you're making me think about is the mitzvah of Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha, right? To love your neighbor as yourself. And what it occurred to me, Rabbi Akiva says, Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha ze klal gadol b'Torah, that this commandment is a sort of an overarching principle in which really all of the Torah is included. And for myself, I've come to think about V'ahavta l'recha kamocha as meaning radical empathy. In order to fulfill loving someone else as I love myself, I have to engage in this imaginative exercise and say, can I imagine being that person? Can I try emotionally and imaginatively to understand what this person's situation is like in this moment? And if I were that person in this moment, what would I want? What would be helpful for me? And that's, I think, how we get to echad, by really. So, and again, I just want to say here too, I think this is part of the power of art, the imaginative power of art. There's something to, one of the things I like about art is you can sort of retire from the debating society. Say, listen, let's not argue right now. Let me just paint you a picture. Let me just draw something for you, show you something. Tell me what it makes you feel. Tell me what it makes you think. And so sometimes our mind may resist certain ways of thinking and feeling, and art can sort of do an end run, I think, around that resistance. And that's one of the ways that it can operate as a very powerful midrash. I saw a question flashing.
Yes. Comments.
What was the question? Anybody?
Naomi Levine asks, to the artists, did you specifically look for natural elements in the media? And I guess I'll tackle that one and then hand it off to the others. I do a lot of printmaking in these pieces, and many of the stencils and forms I use for the prints are natural objects. Some are images of them rather than the actual objects, but I'll print from leaves or sticks or grass or the like, and I'll weave natural materials in with paper. So that's how I do it, and I'll hand off to the other two to address that as well.
Sure. Yes, I looked to the natural world quite a bit when I was making this piece. All of the butterflies are researched in terms of their silhouettes and their wing shapes. I was very careful to draw them accurately and to give a very wide variety of representations of their forms. And then I think I mentioned earlier the selection of the choice of paper, especially paper that was rescued from the waste stream. reflects the fact that we have so many resources that are headed for the dump that can be obviously transformed into something so much more. So I was pleased to make a selection of papers that way. I also, when I was making the tiny little bee sculptures, and I knew I wanted them to have a fuzzy little body because all the bees carry the pollen in various hairs on their bodies. And so I utilized some Angora yarn, but dyed it naturally using discarded onion skins. And again, we have so many different ways of creating in harmony with the natural world. We don't have to go to heavily processed materials. In fact, if you take a look at the way things were done even 100 years ago, before we became really switching over into becoming consumers of whatever industrialized corporations were presenting to us, there's a terrific amount of wonderful knowledge about how to very simply and easily do things yourselves that yield beautiful results in the arts and are very friendly to the environment. Olivia?
Olivia, do you want to say something about
Sorry,
the
my
reviews?
internet seems to be a little unstable.
Oh.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Based on how it's grown.
Well, we apologize. It seems that Olivia's having a little bit of trouble with her internet, but I would love to thank everyone for being here today, all of our speakers and all of the audience. I'd love to mention that if you want to see more about the exhibition, please visit our website, charachgallery.org. We have a full gallery and we have links to reference material that's necessary to understand fully what the exhibit is talking about. And you can see more about each artist. There's links to their websites and everything. And if there's any questions that you have about the gallery, feel free to call me at any time. My phone number here at the gallery is 248-432-5579. And you can also send us an email on our website as well.
And I want to thank Rabbi Diamond, Olivia, Leslie, and Laura for being with us and for such a wonderful discussion. And thanks to all of you at home for joining us. Our next event is Abraham Joshua Heschel, A Life of Radical Amazement, with the author Julian Zalazar on Thursday, February 17th at 7 p.m. Remember to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and visit our website, culturalarts.jcc.org/book fair for our full schedule and ways to get involved. Looking forward to seeing you next time.